Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show, joining you every morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Apologies for the slight lateness. I got up, made the show, sat down. Well, actually, not sat down, sorted out all the bins and stuff because it's Tuesday, so I've got to do all that stuff. And at about 5 to 8, just started sneezing and sneezing and sneezing and not stopping. And yeah, I was like, goodness me, I'm not going to be able to do the show this morning, but it has seemingly subsided. I do suffer with allergies of cats and dogs. We don't have cats and dogs here, but my missus does at their house. So I imagine I may have somehow come into contact with a piece of clothing with a load of dog or cat hair on it, which sucks because I'm a real dog person. I love dogs in particular, and I'm never going to be able to have one because, as you can tell, just by coming into contact with a bit of a clothing with some dog hair on from maybe a week ago, it just sets me off like crazy. So yes, which, by the way, when a lot of people were talking about the fitness stuff and people said, get a dog, it helps you to go out walking. I'm like, I wish I could. I wish I could get a dog, but I can't. And by the way, speaking of which, tonight we'll be recording the second episode of Eat, Sleep, Repeat Arsenal with myself, Owen, Sophie, and Dr. Raj. So do make sure you tune in tomorrow. You have those notifications turned on because that will be released tomorrow midday. We're talking a lot about, of course, today's game, which we'll talk more about in a bit. But do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're indeed new to the channel. Really appreciate all the kind words in the chat box. People are telling me to get hyperallergenic dogs. I've tried it. I've been around people's houses who have hyperallergenic dogs. It doesn't matter. The allergy is clearly that bad that it still affects me with those. So unfortunately, that's not a solution. But I appreciate people trying. Good morning to Paul. Good morning to Blackshine. Matt G. Good morning to PJ. And happy birthday to Matt G as well. I hope you had a fantastic day, my friend. One of the longest and most committed listeners. Longest not in terms of like how long his body is, just like how long he's listened to the show. Hope that made sense. But good morning and happy birthday to you, Matt. PJ, good morning to you, to Temi, to Red Star, to Jose, Stevie. Good morning to Mark. Good morning, demands a tactical breakdown on Joao Felix. Hopefully soon. Mark, good morning to you. Amira, Rich, Lynn, Alpha, Martin. We've got Vivian, Kieran, Anthony. Good morning, guys. Damien. We've got Stephen and Granddaddy Gooner. Good morning to Olu and Machiavelli, Brad, and so many more of you as well joining us in the chat box. I hope you're doing good. I hope you're doing well. Let's crack on with today's show. And Bakary Sagna was pictured visiting the boys in Dubai, speaking to Mikel Arteta, meeting with the players, long-time Arsenal player, of course, and Manchester City, of course, where he went to as well. I always remember that game. Where was it? Was it the Community Shield where we beat Manchester City and Sagna had kind of just moved and he was sitting in the stands and looking rather glum, watching Arsenal beat City in the Community Shield. But I think we know that he's very much an Arsenal man. I never got the feeling of the Man Cityers of the Nasris and the Adebayor vibe ever off of Bakary Sagna. And very appreciative for what he did. And ultimately was in that starting lineup that helped us win that FA Cup against Hull and end the droughts that we've been suffering for so long. So Bakary Sagna, always a pleasure to see him. Arsenal will play AC Milan in their second and final friendly of the Dubai Super Cup series. If Arsenal win this game, they will be confirmed winners of the tournament. Lyon's 3-1 win over Liverpool means that Arsenal can even lose the penalty shootout and they would still win the competition by beating Milan in this game. But Milan are expected to have a much better team than what we faced against Lyon. It is meant to be a bigger challenge than what we faced against Lyon. They don't have the likes of Olivier Giroud, etc., of course, because he's not been there. But Fikayo Tomori, Rebic, they've got some young players like Adley coming through as well that they'll be using, I'm sure. So they're going to have some decent players involved. And we've got a Tonali, of course, in midfield. So we're going to have to make sure that we've got as much quality as we can today. You'll be able to follow all the updates if you aren't able to watch the game at football.london. If you are going to the game, just like I asked with the last game against Lyon, and a few people did reply to me, and you are in the stadium in Dubai, please do send me a DM. And I'd love to get some photos and pictures from you of your time at the game that I can include in the blog, because pictures have been really hard to come by through the usual channels that we use. They're quite late updating. I don't know why. Maybe it's something to do with the stadium. But yeah, if you're going to the game, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know and get involved with the blog today. Gabriel Jesus is said to be responding well. This is according to Jack Rosso of ESPN, who has claimed that after his surgery, Jesus is doing very, very well. There is still yet to be any kind of discussion on a potential return timeline for Jesus. However, knowing that he's responding well from this training and that I think I believe there was an indication that he was at London Colney during the snow day, starting his rehabilitation, and that things are looking up for Jesus. Whether this means it will be less than 3 months on the sidelines, it is definitely far, far, far too early to tell. But the early signs are good, and he is said, as I say, to be responding well to the rehabilitation, early signs after the surgery. So that's good. Arsenal's ownership is reportedly ready to back Arteta, and they are very understanding of Arsenal's position in the table and what the opportunity that there is to potentially be in with winning a title this year. The ownership are going to back Arteta and the club with funds in this winter window to try and get the right players through the door. Now, it might be that the summer transfer window, of course, is then affected by how much Arsenal spend during this window. We're also, I think, banking a bit on the fact that we've probably, touch wood, got hold of Champions League football for next season as well. So let's see what happens. Let's see how much we end up spending. But you can tell by the players that we're being linked to that they are going to cost a significant amount of money to try and get in. The first of those, of course, is Mykhaylo Mudryk of Shakhtar Donetsk. And we have to talk about the fact that the 60 million euro price tag is apparently something that he would be more available for behind the scenes. Publicly, there continues to be this adamancy that 100 million is his price tag. Ben Jacobs reported yesterday that Cerner, the sporting director there, former player of Shakhtar and Croatia, of course, reported that he had said that anyone buying him is going to have to pay a lot of money to get hold of Mykhaylo Mudryk. However, Jacobs does concur with the reports of likes of The Athletic and elsewhere that there would be a reasonable drop in price in order to be able to get hold of Mykhaylo Mudryk. Arsenal want to get this deal done. We've said it for some time that he clearly is the priority option for Arsenal, that he's the one name that keeps on coming up over and over and over again. I look forward to doing an updated version of the tactical breakdown, hopefully on him very soon, and as well pushing towards seeing him join the club and compete with the current starters as well. I think he'd be a really good backup. Not even backup, that's the wrong word. Competition is the right word for the players that we have currently starting in the Arsenal 11. And the headline story of the day is that, according to reports emanating from Spain, Arsenal are said to be leading the race for Joao Felix. Now, it has been made known to Arsenal by Atletico Madrid and the players' representatives as well, supposedly, that because of the situation between Joao Felix and Diego Simeone, that he would indeed be available. They've also pushed to Arsenal to say that with Gabriel Jesus injured, there is this opportunity here that you can try and move for in Joao Felix. Now, as I said in yesterday's show, I'm always very cautious of when reports use terminology like leading the race, because I'm not sure that gives us potentially any real information about where Arsenal stand with a move. Leading the race could mean you're leading a race of just one. It could mean you're leading the race of 20. It gives you no context at all. It could mean that if you're the only one in for the player, of course you're leading the race. You're also the last in that race because you're the only one running it. You see what I mean? The context of words is really important. So I have my doubts still about Joao Felix and the legitimacy of the potential for Arsenal to get this deal done. That said, I would love to see Joao Felix and Mudryk, of course, join Arsenal. I think if Arsenal added the pair of those, I mean, Joao Felix and Mudryk being added to a front line that already has Saka, Jesus, Martinelli, Smith Rowe, without even mentioning Nelson Nketiah and Marquinhos, think about the attacking potential that this Arsenal team have. Think about the variations of options Arsenal have. Joao Felix can play through the middle. He can play on the wings. He can play behind the striker. He's a very versatile forward. Mudryk, of course, can play on the left-hand side. I think he's versatile enough that we'd be able to mould him into another kind of position as well. And Martinelli and Jesus are also very versatile. Jesus has played in the wide area, so you could play Jesus instead of Saka or instead of Martinelli. Or, you could play Joao Felix and Jesus and Mudryk as a front three. It gives you the rotational options. When we play Champions League next season, fingers crossed, and we need to rotate significantly, having these options would be great. I would be shocked if both arrive. I think there's a good chance that we could potentially get one of them. But I think that signing two would, it's just beyond my wildest dreams to imagine that Arsenal would be able to pull that off in the January window. But let's see what happens. Football does crazy things, and so do Arsenal. So let's see if both can happen. But I very, very, very much think that only one will, and I'm leaning far, far, far toward Mudryk than Joao Felix in terms of the realisticness, if that's even a word, the reality, the likelihood of that deal happening. Anyway, that brings an end to part one. We're going to move to part two and your questions right after this. Okay. Oh, let's get rid of that. There we go. Lovely stuff. Let's go to part two then and tackle some of your comments and queries and theories and questions and stuff like that in the chat box. So let's go through as many of them as we can. Machiavelli says Tielemans is not mobile enough. I assume this is in response to Joel, who says Mudryk and Tielemans is all I want. Whenever I see questions or comments then that Tielemans isn't mobile enough, I often point them in the direction of Granit Xhaka. Granit Xhaka is considered to be one of the least mobile players in the Arsenal team, and yet you look at him in that box-to-box role this season, and you see the output of him. You see what he's doing in the final third. You see what he's doing coming back into the middle and the defensive third as well. Mobile is one of, I think, the most over-hyped and overrated qualities of a midfielder in particular. It's the FIFA-fication, if you like, I feel, of things where people need their players to have over 80 pace for them to be good. This is how I feel about it. This is how I think the rhetoric comes from. Tielemans is very mobile, well on the ball. Sure, off the ball, he's not the fastest player in the world, but on the ball, he's great with moving the ball at his feet, great at moving it out of tight spaces, and great at passing the ball through as well. And if you can move the ball quickly, that's far, far more important than it is about however fast you can run. And Granit Xhaka is the perfect proof of that point, playing in that left number 8 position. So if mobility is the only thing that's putting you off Youri Tielemans, I would suggest maybe shelving that doubt and looking around the player beyond your worries about how mobile he is. Abdullah says, Tom, do you think Atletico would even lower the price for Felix, considering how fuming we left them on deadline day with the Partey release clause? Yeah, our relationship between the two clubs after that was damaged. That is absolutely 100% certain. Atletico Madrid were not happy with that at all, and very frustrated with that going down, Simeone in particular. That said, the only way I really see this deal happening is if Arsenal are able to agree a loan with Atletico Madrid that has an obligation to buy at a very serious summer transfer price. Now, if Arsenal are clever, what they'll do is make it an option to buy, but of course with clauses in that loan deal so that if he reaches a certain number of appearances or a certain number of goals or minutes, Arsenal would be obliged to pay that transfer fee for the player. I think that's the only way in which Arsenal are going to be able to do that realistically. Is it possible? Absolutely. It seems as though Atletico Madrid, from reports, are open to a potential loan move for the player. However, if clubs do come in and start offering big fees and permanent contracts for him, it might make that difficult. It still falls on the player to choose where they want to go, but it can be difficult when clubs start putting in permanent contracts. Aston Villa are apparently one of the sides that are being courted by Jorge Mendes about it, according to The Athletic. I imagine Chelsea might be very interested after what's happened to Armando Broja, so we'll have to wait and see. Jabu says, if the price is 60 million for Mudryk and Joao, who is your preference? It's a great question because Joao Felix is obviously, I think, less of a risk at the same price as Mudryk because he's playing for La Liga. He's playing in La Liga, playing at a high level. He's been playing for longer. He's 23 years of age, playing on the international level as well and doing well. And I think he would suit Arsenal's system. And his versatility is greater than that of Mudryk as well. I think I'd lean towards Joao Felix. I do, but it is close. And the reason why I lean towards Joao Felix is because of his versatility to play left, play in the middle, play second striker if you want him to. That added level of coverage and quality and more of a guarantee with how he's played at a top level and in the Champions League with Atleti to further stage. All of these things combined, I think, lead me to think that he might be the better option of the two if you can get them for around that £60-ish million mark. Amira says, do you think there will be a limit set on how much players can go for in the future? Even players under 18 are going for ridiculous fees. Potentially, it might be something that the footballing bodies look into because fees are getting out of control. Alan says, Jesus is injured, so do we go for a centre forward or buy Mudryk or Felix and play Martinelli as a centre forward? Remember that Felix can play through the middle, so that is also something you have to consider. I think that in terms of Jesus being injured, I personally don't think that's going to affect us too much. I still think the wide player will take the priority, and I think a midfielder is still going to be very much in the eyes of the club as well. Fuad says, we need Stan to channel his inner Bowley this January, Tom. Believe. I hope that he does. Maybe I think it's more Josh. Josh seems to have much more of a say on things this winter. And just not in just winter in general, with Arsenal. His connection to the club, his work with Arteta and Edu. He is a lot more connected, I think, with Arsenal than what his dad is, and understands and really wants Arsenal to progress. And I have a lot of time for Josh Kroenke. I think that he has certainly enabled us to be more open, more connected as a fan base with the ownership. And I think we're seeing the benefits of that now. He told us to be excited. It's something that was certainly taking the mick out of. Maybe it wasn't that season that we were meant to be excited, but I tell you what, Arsenal fans are excited now, and they're excited about this season. Viraj says, hey, Tom, how do players get paid for their participation at the World Cup? Do clubs still cover the wages? They'll still be being paid by their... I'm actually not sure if they are still paid by their clubs. What I can tell you is that they get paid about Arsenal get paid about £8,500 per player per day that they're at the tournament. Jesus has also said because he's been injured at the tournament, after 4 weeks of his injury, Arsenal will also start to be paid by FIFA for the time that he is out. But it isn't a lot. All the players that went to the tournament, if France reached the final, with Saliba being there, of course, I think Arsenal will get around 2 million in total for all of the players that were there. Similar figure, I think, for Jesus if he's out for 3 months. It's not a lot of money. So despite there being some compensation, it's not loads. I also don't know if Arsenal still continue paying the wages of those players whilst they're at the tournament either. So that's a bit of a difficult one. Ritian says, if France make the final, Saliba may be unavailable for the first game back. Should we play White as centre-back and Tommy at right-back? That's what I would do. If France do make the final and Saliba is unavailable for the first game back, I would play White at centre-back and I would play White at centre-back and Tomiyasu at right-back. Difficult sentence to say that over and over again. Greg says 100 million is obviously too much for Mudryk or Joao Felix, but what is a realistic price? 40 for Mudryk, 65 for Joao Felix. I think 60 million euros, which is around 52.3 for both, separately, is what you'll probably end up having to pay. 87.5 million pounds is a lot of money. Getting it down by 30 plus is going to take a lot, but it might be possible. Who knows? Maybe there'll be further incentives that see the fee rise even higher if those players go on to achieve certain things. We'll have to wait and see. Jacob the Gooner says Felix could be our Diogo Jota style player, a player that I've been trying to, really rave about on the channel for a long time. We need our own Diogo Jota. Maybe Joao Felix can be that. Also, I hope everyone is well, unlike I am at the moment. Sorry to throw bad energy in here, but life has been tough. Well, Jacob, I hope that you find strength very soon and from the people around you as well. You've got a family here, and I hope that you can come into this chat box and be honest as clearly that you have. So if people are giving you support in the chat box, that's great. And I'm hoping that they are. Owen says, apologies if this question already been asked, tuning in on my break at work. But if Felix and Mudryk were available for the same price, which option is best? It was actually asked, Owen, but that's fine. I said I leant towards Felix because of his versatility. Akaka says, hi, Tom. Question on the ownership to back Mykhaylo and how they will spend. Would you like to take Joao Felix on loan? Can help us in our title bid, and then who is our main target in midfield in January? Yeah, I think the loan for Joao Felix is an option if it's real, and that's the big question. In midfield, I want to get the Tielemans deal done. I think he's the most sensible option for us to go for in January. He's Premier League ready. I think he can come in and have an immediate impact, needs no transition time outside of moving to a new club, knows the league, knows the level, knows the expectation. Go get Tielemans, go get it done. That's what I would say about this January window. Let's go to Rich, who says there's no reason that there's contracted salaries would stop while at the World Cup. The contracts are still void and last for several years. Absolutely. Manu says, I'm not a La Liga regular and defo not an Atletico watcher because of their football being horrid. But what are Felix's strengths and weaknesses? Is he consistent? Is he a Simeone type player? The last question, is he a Simeone type player? The answer to that is no. And that's actually one of the reasons as to why he's not really settled at Atletico Madrid. And it's difficult then to get a real grasp of how good he is. And I think the best way to get a grasp of how effective he can be is when he plays for Portugal, because he plays more so in a wider position rather than through the middle like he can do Atleti in that two-striker system that they have. The thing is that under Simeone, that style, that even though Simeone's tried to change his style, he bought Joao Felix and Thomas Lemar and players like this because he wanted to try and change the way in which they played. It hasn't necessarily worked. He's played Marcos Llorente at right back, one of the most talented Spanish players in my view, Marcos Llorente, and he started using him as a right back. This is the kind of manager we're talking about, and one that so many Arsenal fans were desperate to see join Arsenal. Desperate. I never wanted that. It's ill to me. I never wanted him because there was an early time in his career when I certainly was open to it. But, certainly in the times of toughness when we were swapping out Emery for Arteta, or when Arteta was going through periods of roughness, Simeone, man, like you look at the style of football, it's a real struggle. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it gives you a foil, and that's why you're able to take advantage of how poor Real Madrid and Barcelona have been and win a title recently. But you won a title back in the early 2010s because of, just that style that he'd kind of accomplished with the players that he had at the time. To be so different and diverse from what was there, it kind of shocked a bit, I think, La Liga, and I was able to really establish himself there and as a real force in that table. But going back to Felix and going off on a bit of a tangent here, strengths, great technical ability, can take players on well. He's not slow by any means. He's got a lot of those Jesus characteristics of energy and dropping back and applying pressure. He's also got the ability to finish. When he's in those positions, I trust him when he gets into some really good potential possibilities. And I think that confidence is obviously the key weakness. Confidence is what lets him down, and sometimes with his finishing lets him down because he's in a team that he's not particularly enjoying his football, aren't in the best of form right now as well. If Felix is in good form, and if he's confident, if he's in a team that back him and support him and plays like he wants to play, I think there's a coiled spring in Felix that I think can really explode. So yeah, that for me is why I lean towards him over Mudryk, because of his versatility being another strength, his style, and the way in which I think he'd fit into the Arsenal team. Let's scroll down some more. N5 says, why are players needing a rest after the World Cup? They have played less games than the league it's replacing. I think it's just to do with kind of, you're being away from your team, and after the World Cup anyway, you've got this World Cup here. You've got a whole season either side of it. And typically that's not the case. You play your season, there's a bit of a break, and then there's the World Cup. And they want to give players a break because there's going to be a lot more football to play, in the weeks and months to come. So if you can give players an opportunity for some rest after they finish the World Cup and then come back into training, it just gives them that ability to then recharge their batteries somewhat. And that's important. Rest is equally as important as training. Having that recharge of energy is absolutely crucial. Rich says, Tom, would Joao Felix's salary be a problem? Given the transfer fee, I can imagine it's very high and might not fit our wage structure. Let's have a look at what his current salary is at the moment. According to just the only place I can really go to, Spot Rack might have it. Although Capology's got one. They claim that he is on how much per week? Weekly, 280,000 euros. So let's have a look at euros to pounds. Euro to pounds. Okay, 280,000. So he is on more right now than Arsenal's highest paid player at £220,000 per week at Jesus. So I don't think he'd be able to get a pay rise. I think he'd certainly be looking to get a similar wage, maybe even slightly less. But he might be willing to go down slightly and fit into Arsenal's wage structure in order to get that move, because he really wants to move. He's earned a lot of money. I think that Arsenal will be able to potentially agree, with a potential deal with him and maybe work him into the wage structure somehow. If that is even accurate, of course. Josefa says, hey, Tom, although we are leading the league this year, we may need to add more competitive players to compete for titles every year. What ideal but realistic transfers gets us there? I think that the left centre-back has to come into the equation. I think that the right-back situation needs to be looked at. If we lose White or Tomiyasu, I think we lack an offensive option at right-back. The number 6, we need a competitor for Thomas Partey. At the moment, we still need a competitor for Granit Xhaka and long-term replacements for the both of them. We need to consider adding, I think, a better striker than Eddie Nketiah to support Gabriel Jesus. That's where we need to look. And I think if you add Mudryk as well, you're adding a great wide option. We need to look at maybe someone who can play on the right-hand side as well. Nelson, Marquinhos. Marquinhos is going to go out on loan. I think we can all agree. Nelson's going to move on. Eddie Nketiah is probably going to move on. Lokonga's going to move on. Cedric's going to move on. Holding's going to move on. You know, we need to start thinking about replacing these guys with much, much better talent in the future. And I think that's how it's done. It's by having 2 or 3 good players in every single position that are competitors, not backups. Olu says, hey Tom, we have 4 excellent youngsters in Patino, Ethan Nwaneri, Miles Lewis-Skelly, and Lopez. Is that Joe Lopez? I'm pretty sure he's gone. But Patino, Nwaneri, and Lewis-Skelly certainly are. Maybe you meant Souza, the left back. Maybe he obviously Lopez played left back as well, but I think Souza is probably who you meant. Will they have a best chance of making the first team? So if you do mean Souza, I think Souza's going to struggle because you've got Tierney, Zinchenko, Tomiyasu. Difficult. Maybe if he starts going out on loans for the next few years or so, then when he comes back in a few years' time, Zinchenko and Tierney are then, in their late 20s. Maybe there's a chance for him then, but I think he's going to have to go on some loans and gradually work his way up the pyramid. Lewis-Skelly and then Nwaneri, we need to sign on to brand new contracts first. They're still within this kind of contract uncertainty, and we need to get them onto permanent professional contracts. City, Chelsea, United, Liverpool, all looking at them. So we need to make sure that we get them tied down. But both of them, I think, potentially could have futures. But again, they're going to need loans. Patino, absolutely. The kid's special. He's special. I've watched some of the games of him at Blackpool this season. He's just a cut above everyone else. He plays like an Arsenal player. I think he really could potentially take over that role from Xhaka. There's a real player there. He even could maybe be our deepest midfielder. But I think that might waste some of his offensive contributions. But he is really good in those deeper midfield roles. So maybe it's Xhaka where he replaces. But I think we got a real special talent there, and England as well. So one to keep an eye out on in the future. Scarface says, I think something very important to note, though, is that Felix is not a lone striker. I regularly watch La Liga and can tell you, unless he's playing with a partner up top, he isn't very effective as a 9. This is something I used to believe in. This is something that I really used to push and said, we don't want to go out and sign X striker because they play in a 2-striker system. In reality, I was a bit of a fool. And I'm not calling you a fool directly, Scarface, for thinking this, but I was a bit of a fool for using to fall into this trap. And the reason why it doesn't apply is because if you've got wide players that support the striker, and if you've got a number 10 or a midfielder behind them that support the striker as much as we do at Arsenal, a striker that has been typically playing in a 2-striker system can very easily transition to playing into a sole striker system that has the support and the players running off and running ahead and running around and playing direct passes into those type of roles. And Arsenal have that. Arsenal have that in Martinelli and in Saka and in Ødegaard, who is getting much further forward and much more effective in the box than he ever used to be. So for that reason, I don't necessarily buy into this argument anymore of the 2-striker system being a block for certain forwards, because it doesn't always work that way. I know you're right in saying that he plays in a 2-striker system at Atleti. He's also played in a 1-striker system at Portugal on his own and on the left-hand side as well when he's been asked to play that role. I have no issues with what formation he's been playing in, because it really does not necessarily affect players in a certain type of sole striker system, especially the one that plays at Arsenal. Billy says, I'm surprised no one mentioned Mehdi Taremi. Shane did. Could be an option for short to mid-term. He's 30, but started in Europe at 27. Late bloomer, could be available on loan. If it was on loan to the end of the season and we were also getting in a wide player, maybe. But I'm not really interested in investing into 30, 29, 30, 31-year-old strikers at this stage. It takes up a spot in the squad for the next 2 or 3 seasons. And I think we'd be better off going for someone with a higher ceiling that's going to develop further and improve than someone that's going to regress whilst they're at the club. Pick and Roll says Olivier Giroud for the next 6 months. Yeah, I don't know why AC Milan would ever let that happen. Jasha says, morning, Tom. How confident are you that Arsenal will get any of these signings? Mudryk, I've said I've been 50-50 about Mudryk. It's always for me that if Arsenal can get the price down, then we could get Mudryk in. And it's always been that. It's about whether or not Arsenal can convince Shakhtar Donetsk to accept a fee significantly lower than that 100 million that they want. We're going to have to go to the 60s. If it doesn't get into the 60s, I don't think it's going to happen. But we'll wait and see. Lynn says, I can't understand why Arsenal let the young guy go to Chelsea. Amari Hutchinson, he was their best player against Aston Villa. It's not that Arsenal let him go. And this is something I think Arsenal have been criticised for. Amari Hutchinson wanted guarantees that Arsenal couldn't give him. He wanted to know that he was going to be playing, in the senior team very, very soon and getting minutes. And I mean, a lot of minutes. And Arsenal couldn't guarantee that. They went out and bought Fabio Vieira, who I think a lot of people, if Amari Hutchinson has a brilliant time at Chelsea, will look back on and go, why did we buy Fabio Vieira when we had Amari Hutchinson? Now, Amari Hutchinson is slightly different to Fabio Vieira. He plays slightly to the right and has done work very well, but also can play attacking midfield too. But that's the reason. Ødegaard starting was never going to be dropped for Hutchinson. Saka was never going to be dropped for Hutchinson. And Fabio Vieira coming in, I think, ended Amari Hutchinson's hope at Arsenal, and that's why he left. So it wasn't that Arsenal let him go. He moved on, and he pushed to move on. And Arsenal could never really secure a contract with him. They tried for a long time, but they weren't ever able to agree a deal with Amari Hutchinson. So he left. He is a client of Kia Jarabchin. It's worth pointing out as well. So whether or not that played any part in it is an interesting one to consider too. Sasha says, do you believe it's true we have ended our Danilo interest, or is that us playing poker? Watches of him seem to be very high. They're high in terms of his ceiling, as we've talked about on the show, Sasha. He is still raw. He does still make mistakes, and I don't think he necessarily starts for Arsenal over Mohamed Elneny right now. He would do in the future and would improve to be better than Mohamed Elneny. But right now, if we were playing Man City tomorrow, the argument is, would you start Danilo or would you start Elneny? If Partey wasn't available, you start Elneny. You don't start Danilo. And in this January transfer window in particular, Arsenal need competitive quality. And Danilo isn't that. Ending our interest, maybe not ended, maybe paused, might be a better way to phrase it. We might have paused our interest in Danilo, but I don't think January is when we're going to get him. And I know there is an argument that, of course, with the summer window making it difficult to sign players from Brazil, I get that. But January this season is about signing competitive quality, and Danilo isn't a competitor to our starters. He's just not good enough to be that player. I think we're going to wrap up there. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. As always, much appreciated. As I say, I'll be recording tonight, not live, but we're recording the Eat, Sleep, Repeat Arsenal podcast this evening, going out for you guys at lunchtime tomorrow. Arsenal play against AC Milan today. I'll be doing the live blog over at football.london, so you'll be able to watch and follow that. If you're going to the game, please drop me a DM at the Gooner Talk TV or just the Gooner Talk on Instagram. You can find me there. Please send me a DM to let me know that you are going to the game, just so I can have a chat and see if you can get involved with our live blog today as well. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure. Mohammed says, did not read my comment. I wonder. Look, I'm going to address this now. There's a lot of people in the chat box. In fact, there's over 900 of you watching. It's very frustrating when I see comments that sometimes complain about not getting their comments read out. There's a lot of people that wait very patiently in this chat box to get their comments read out without, constantly going in. And when I scroll through, I usually look at the ones I see and go for them when I see them. If I've missed your question, I can only apologize. I've got a lot of people to go through in here. As I said, there's over 900 of you posting comments all the time. So if you think there's any ulterior motive, there isn't. And that's quite sad that would be the case. But yeah, is what it is. I mean, it's very strange, Mohammed, because I've had you on the show a number of times. So to think that there's any kind of ulterior motive is a real shame indeed. What a sad way to end the show today. Thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate your time. For those that haven't got that kind of mentality, really appreciate it. Do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. again. And of course, reacting to that game against AC Milan. Have a fantastic day. I will see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.